He was my older brother, the one who taught me how to ride a bike, how to skip rocks across the river. I trusted him. I loved him. And then one night, he crawled into my bed, and everything changed. I was 14. He was 17. It didn't happen just once. It happened until I missed my cycle, until my belly grew, until Mama cried herself sick and Daddy punched the wall but never touched him. They made me give the baby away, said it was better for everyone. I never saw his face, never knew if it was a boy or a girl. I just remember the ache, not in my body, but in my soul. I carried that silence for over 60 years. But last winter, a letter came, and it changed everything. My name is Faye Annette Williams. I'm 79 years old, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, right on the edge of the Mississippi River. We lived in a small brick house with a porch that creaked when you stepped too hard. My father was a steel worker. My mama baked pies for the church fundraisers. People thought we were a good family, but behind closed doors, the air was thick with secrets. I was the youngest of 5, and the only girl. They said I was quiet, delicate, a little too soft for my own good. I never spoke up, never caused trouble. And when my brother started sneaking into my room at night, I didn't tell a soul, not Mama, not the school nurse, not the church ladies who always patted my head like I was a puppy. By the time I realized I was pregnant, the damage had already been done. Not just to my body, but to my trust, my voice, my sense of worth. I gave the baby up. I wasn't given a choice. And for decades, I lived like she never existed, until the day she found me. If you're from a city like St. Louis, or if you've ever been forced to bury your truth to protect someone else, I want to hear from you. Comment with the name of your city. Let us know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments. Let Faye know she's not alone. Like this video if her story touched your heart. And subscribe for more stories from women who found their voice, even when the world told them to stay silent. Before the silence, before the shame, before the broken nights, there was laughter. I remember that part most vividly. The sound of my brothers running through the yard, teasing each other over marbles and who got the last spoonful of Mama's peach cobbler. I remember the squeak of the porch swing as we sat out on hot St. Louis evenings. Fireflies blinking like little promises in the dark. My brother Henry was the oldest, then Charles, Jerome, and David, and me, Faye, the baby, the only girl. Henry was my favorite. He wasn't the smartest or the loudest, but he had a quiet way about him. He taught me how to skip rocks on the river, how to climb the sycamore tree without scraping my knees, and how to whistle through my fingers. He called me Little Bit. And when Daddy was in one of his moods, shouting about dust on the windowsills or a shoe left in the hallway, Henry would shield me, pull me behind him and say, "She's just a kid, Daddy." I thought he was my protector. I thought he was safe. I was wrong. The shift came slow, like dusk creeping in before you notice the sun is gone. I was 14 when it began, really began. One night, Mama and Daddy were at a church revival. The boys were all supposed to be doing homework. I was in my room reading one of Mama's old magazines, tracing the outline of a model in a dress I could never imagine wearing. The door creaked. Henry stepped in. At first, I thought he needed something, a pencil maybe. But he didn't ask. He sat on the bed beside me, too close. I remember how loud my heart beat. "I like your hair like that," he said, reaching out. I pulled away. "Don't be scared, little bit," he whispered. And then, it happened. I didn't scream. I didn't know I could. I didn't understand what was happening. Not really. I just knew it felt wrong. Like something inside me broke. When it was over, he kissed my forehead and said, "This is just between us. Our little secret." Then he left. I stared at the ceiling for hours that night, the cracks in the plaster looking like veins across the sky. The next morning, I couldn't eat, couldn't speak. but no one noticed. Mama was too busy ironing Daddy's shirts. Daddy was too busy shouting about the cost of groceries. Henry winked at me over breakfast. And that was the beginning of the silence. It didn't stop. There. He came back, again and again, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the afternoon when no one was home. Each time he whispered the same thing. "You're lucky. You're mine." And I believed him, because I didn't know what else to believe. Who would I tell? Not Mama. She once slapped me for asking why Henry got extra mashed potatoes at dinner, not Daddy. He didn't speak unless it was a command or a curse, not the church ladies, not my teachers, not even the mirror. I stopped brushing my hair, stopped reading, stopped skipping rocks. I became quiet, invisible, until the day my stomach turned. At first, I thought it was nerves, then maybe a stomach bug. But when the sickness didn't stop, Mama took me to the local clinic. The nurse, a thin woman with sharp glasses, did the math. Her mouth went tight. 14 weeks, she said. You're having a baby. I couldn't breathe. Mama fainted. Daddy, when he found out, didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He stormed into the house, belt in hand, and hit me so hard I couldn't stand. "You filthy girl," he hissed. "You brought shame into my house." I tried to tell him. I tried, but he wouldn't listen. "You'll give that thing away," he said, "and you'll never speak of this again." Henry never said a word. Not that night. Not ever. And that was when I learned. Some people protect monsters, even when they live under the same roof. Especially when they live under the same roof. The day Mama found out I was pregnant, she dropped a bowl of cornbread batter on the floor. It splattered across her shoes, her apron, even the wall. But she didn't flinch. She just stared at the mess like it had spoken some unspeakable truth. Later, she sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, lips trembling. "You're gonna bring a bastard into this world?" she whispered. I wanted to scream that it wasn't my fault, that her son had done this, that I was just a child. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because her eyes weren't angry. They were ashamed. Not for me, for herself, for what the neighbors might say, for what the pastor might think, for the stain it would leave on the family name. She leaned close and said, "If anyone asks, you were careless with a boy from school. You'll nod, you'll apologize, and you'll keep your mouth shut." I nodded. And that was the day I became invisible in my own home. Henry walked around like nothing had happened. He mowed the lawn, washed Daddy's car, joked with the other boys about girls from school, and never once looked me in the eye. Mama never touched my belly, never asked how I felt. She treated the pregnancy like a virus, something to endure in silence. I slept in the basement from the 5th month on, said it was cooler down there. The truth was, Mama didn't want the neighbors to see me. I stopped going to school, stopped going to church, stopped being Faye. Sometimes I sat on the old couch in the basement, staring at the concrete wall, tracing the cracks with my eyes. I imagined each one was a road leading somewhere else, anywhere but St. Louis. Then one morning, Mama came downstairs holding a folded paper. "You'll sign this," she said. It was from an adoption agency, arranged by a woman at church, quiet, discreet. "No fuss, no records. You'll never see the baby. It's best this way." I held the pen like it was a weapon. "But what if I want—" "You don't want," she snapped. "You can't." I signed. I was 6 months pregnant, 14 years old, and already being erased from my own story. The day I gave birth, Mama didn't hold my hand. Daddy didn't come to the hospital. Henry was at home eating pot roast. It was a girl. I knew it the second I felt her against my chest. She let out the tiniest cry, soft and sharp, like a question I didn't know how to answer. They took her from me after 20 minutes. I wasn't allowed to name her. I watched the nurse walk away with her in a pink blanket, and I felt something in me collapse. Not just my womb, but my world. When Mama came to pick me up 2 days later, she didn't ask how I was. She just said, "You'll put this behind you now. We all will." But I never did, and I never could. Because I wasn't just mourning a child I couldn't keep. I was mourning the girl I used to be. The one who used to skip rocks, the one who used to dream, the one who used to believe that love meant safety. I don't remember the sound of her cry, not exactly. But I remember how her body felt against mine, for those 20 brief minutes they let me hold her. She was warm, damp. Her fingers curled like little question marks, and her eyes. Her eyes were open, wide and searching, as if she knew this would be the only time she'd ever see my face. They wrapped her in a soft pink blanket, one with little white lambs stitched along the edge. I memorized it, because it was the only thing that felt real in that sterile room filled with whispers and clipped voices. I wasn't allowed to name her. They said it would make things harder. But in my head, I did. I called her Hope. Hope, because that's all I had left. The nurse who wheeled her out never looked me in the eye, just said, "She'll be placed with a good family." I wanted to scream, "I am her family." But the words stuck in my throat, like everything else. The next morning, I was discharged with a pamphlet about moving forward after difficult decisions, as if this had been a choice. Mama took me home in silence. She didn't ask how I felt, didn't mention the baby, just handed me a folded stack of church bulletins and said, "You can volunteer with the nursery next Sunday." I went upstairs, laid on my bed, and cried until the mattress was damp. That pink blanket, the one with lambs, haunted me, in dreams, in moments of quiet. I saw it every time I closed my eyes, every time I heard a baby cry in a grocery store, every time I passed the hospital on Walnut Street. I wondered where she was, if her new family held her at night, if she cried. For me, if she'd ever ask about the girl who carried her inside a cage of silence and shame. I kept those questions to myself. Years passed. I finished high school through a GED program, got a job at the corner pharmacy, saved up to move out at 17. I never went back home. Not really. Henry left for the army. I never saw him again. Good riddance. Mama got sick in her 60s. Cancer. I visited her once, out of guilt, not love. She didn't mention the baby. We sat in silence for 20 minutes. When I left, she pressed a Bible into my hands and said, "Let the past die." I never opened it, but I never threw it away either. Some ghosts live in pages. By the time I was in my 30s, I'd stopped talking about that part of my life. Most folks thought I'd never had kids. I let them think that. It was easier than explaining the truth. But every birthday, I remembered. Every April 17th, I lit a candle, whispered, "Happy birthday, Hope," and prayed, not to the God my father feared, but to the one I believed might still be listening. I didn't know what kind of woman she became, but I prayed she was safe. I prayed she was loved. And I prayed one day she might come looking. It came on a Thursday, just after noon. I'd just made myself a cup of tea and was sitting on the porch, watching the mailman shuffle toward my little gate like he did every day. Bills, flyers, a church bulletin I never asked for, and then a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name. Written. In cursive. Shaky, but careful. Faye Annette Williams, St. Louis, M.O. I turned it over in my hands. No markings, no stamp date I could read clearly. Just paper, light as a whisper, that suddenly weighed more than the whole porch beneath me. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I placed it on my kitchen table, sat down in front of it, and just breathed. Because something deep in my bones already knew. It had been 64 years. 64 Aprils of unanswered questions. Of dreams that faded before they reached morning. of imagining a face I couldn't remember, a voice I'd never heard. And now, this. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of stationery, cream-colored, lined, and folded once down the middle. It read, "Dear Ms. Williams, I was adopted in April of 1959. I've spent most of my life wondering where I came from. A few weeks ago, I submitted my DNA to an ancestry site. It connected me to a distant cousin, one who gave me your name. I don't know what I'm hoping for by writing this. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. I wanted to say I'm here, and I've always wondered who you were. L." There was no phone number, no email, just that letter. I held it to my chest and cried harder than I'd cried in years, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life, hope had a voice. I didn't sleep that night. I reread the letter a dozen times, tracing every curve of her handwriting. I tried to remember the sound of her newborn cry, the shape of her fingers, the warmth of her cheek against mine, and I realized I'd carried her all this time, not just in my memories, but in my body. My bones had remembered her, my dreams, my silence, and now she had written to me. But how could I find her? The letter had no return address, no way to respond, just the first initial, L. I searched everything. I called the ancestry company, explained that I had received a letter, that I was possibly, the birth mother of a woman looking for answers. The representative paused, then said, "We can't give you her contact, but we can send your message forward, if you'd like to respond." If I'd like to respond? I wanted to scream. Instead, I said yes, and then sat down to write a letter I had dreamed of for decades. The reply came 2 weeks later. This time, there was a return address, Southfield, Michigan, and a name, Lily Ann Dawson. My hands trembled as I read the envelope. I whispered the name out loud. Lily. I had named her Hope in my heart all those years ago. But Lily sounded like sunlight, like something gentle that survived the winter. I opened the letter slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Inside, her handwriting was clearer this time, confident. "Dear Ms. Williams," or Faye, if I may, "thank you for writing back. I cried when I read your letter, not because it hurt, but because it felt like meeting a part of myself I didn't know I was missing. I don't want to rush anything or overwhelm you, but I'd love to talk more. If you're open to it, here's my number. Even just a phone call, that would mean more than I can say. With hope, Lily. With hope." I smiled. I hadn't told her what I used to call her. She chose that word on her own. It took me 2 days to call. I practiced what I'd say. I wrote notes, rewrote them, threw them away. Because what do you say to the child you were forced to give up? How do you fill 64 years? In a single conversation. When I finally dialed her number, my fingers were cold. My heart beat so hard I could barely hear the ring. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, steady, younger than I expected, but kind. I cleared my throat. "Lily, this is Faye." There was silence, then a sharp breath. "I'm so glad you called." We spoke for 2 hours that first night. She told me she'd grown up with a family who loved her, but always felt like something was missing. That she'd searched for years, but hit dead end after dead end. That she never thought she'd find me. I told her what I could, that I was only 14, that I didn't have a choice, that I had never stopped thinking of her. She didn't ask for the details of how she came to be. Not then. I think she knew, or at least sensed it was too much for a first call. She told me she'd become a teacher, that she loved gardening, that her daughter, my granddaughter, had the same birthmark I do, just under the chin. I wept. Not out of regret, but from the strange and beautiful ache of being known. We didn't rush anything. She said she needed time to process. So did I. But we kept writing, calling, slowly stitching something back together. Then one day she said, "Would it be okay if I came to visit?" I said yes before I could stop myself, because after all the silence, all the shame, all the years of pretending she didn't exist, I finally had a chance to say the one thing I'd held in my heart for decades. Welcome. Home. She arrived on a Sunday. The porch was swept, the curtains washed. I'd baked a lemon pound cake from the same recipe Mama used to make, though I left out the bitterness. I don't know if it was for her or for me, but something about that cake made me feel steadier. I stood by the window as her rental car pulled into the drive. My knees shook. My breath caught. For a moment, I wondered if I should run. But I didn't, because I'd been running for 64 years, and today, I was ready to. Stand still. When she stepped out of the car, I knew it was her walk, her shape, something in her eyes. They looked like mine used to before the wait. She carried a small bag and a nervous smile. I opened the screen door and stepped onto the porch. "Lily?" She looked up. "Hi, Faye." I don't remember moving. I just know that suddenly we were hugging. Awkward at first, then tighter, as if we were trying to pull 60 years into a single embrace. She smelled like jasmine in springtime. I dreamed of that moment 1,000 ways. None of them came close. We sat at the table near the window. I poured tea, hands trembling only a little. She took a bite of cake, smiled. "This tastes like my grandma's." "She taught me," I whispered. We didn't dive into the past. Not yet. Instead, we talked about her daughter, about my garden, about the squirrels that terrorized my tomato plants. She laughed, and I nearly cried just hearing the sound. Then, after a long pause, she asked, "Do you want to see pictures?" I nodded. She pulled out her phone and turned it to me. There she was, Lily at 10, Lily at 20, her wedding, her daughter, her life. A life I wasn't in, but one I suddenly felt connected to in ways words couldn't explain. "She has your chin," Lily said, pointing to her daughter's photo. "And your eyes," I replied. We sat like that for a while, two women who had lived entire lives apart, now trying to make room for each other in the present. Finally, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't blame you," she said. Tears welled in my eyes. "I didn't have a choice," I whispered. "But I wanted to. God, I wanted to." "I know," she said. "I believe you." And just like that, a piece of me came home. Not all at once, but enough to breathe deeper. Enough to believe that even after all the silence, love had waited. And now it was here. We sat in the living room after dinner, Lily and I. The dishes were washed, the television low in the background. Playing some old movie neither of us was watching. She curled up in my recliner like she'd been there 100 times, not just for the first. I sat on the couch, holding a photo she'd given me of her as a child, missing front teeth, holding a stuffed rabbit. "That was my favorite toy," she said, smiling. I called her Betty. I smiled back, but my stomach twisted. She was opening her childhood to me, and all I could think about was how I hadn't been there for any of it. No scraped knees, no bedtime stories, no Betty the Rabbit. "You were a beautiful child," I whispered, my voice catching. Lily turned serious. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded slowly. "When did you know you were pregnant?" It felt like the air had been sucked from the room. That question, simple as it was, slammed into the part of me I'd kept sealed off for decades. I looked down at my hands, at the creases time had carved into them. "I was late," I said finally. "I thought maybe it was stress, but I knew." Something was wrong. She was quiet. She didn't push, just let me find my way. "My mother took me to a clinic when I couldn't hide it anymore," I continued. "When the nurse said I was 14 weeks, I didn't even know what to think. I didn't understand what was happening inside me, only that I was scared and alone." I expected her to look away. Instead, she leaned forward. "I just wanted to know if you felt anything," she said. If you wanted me." I looked her in the eyes, and my throat burned. "I loved you before I knew how to love anything," I said. "I didn't know your name, I didn't know your face, but I knew you were mine, and I wanted to keep you." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded. "They said it was better if I didn't name you," I added, "but I did in my head." She looked up. "What did you call me?" "Hope." She smiled, a small, trembling smile that cracked something open between us. "I like that," she said. I wanted to reach out to hold her hand, but I wasn't sure if I could, not yet. So instead, I told her something I'd never said out loud. My father beat me when he found out, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I had embarrassed him. My mother, she arranged the adoption. No hugs, no comfort, just silence. Like you were a problem to be solved. Lily wiped her cheek. "I always wondered," she said softly, "why I didn't matter enough to be kept." "You mattered more than anyone," I whispered. "But I had no voice then, no power. They took you before I ever had the chance to hold on to you." She stood and walked over to the couch. "Can I hug you?" she asked. I nodded, and when she wrapped her arms around me, it wasn't the polite embrace of strangers. It was the fierce, aching hold of something lost and found. We sat like that for minutes, breathing together, trembling together. She didn't need to ask any more that night, and I didn't need to explain, because finally, we were two women sharing the weight of one story. And in that quiet room, under the soft hum of old movie dialogue and the ticking of the clock on the wall, I let myself believe that forgiveness was possible, not just hers, but my own. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Habit, mostly. My bones were trained to rise early, like all those years of slipping from bed before the house stirred had never really ended. But that morning felt different, heavier, charged. Lily was still asleep in the guest room, and the house was quiet in a way that made me feel young and old at the same time. I walked to the hall closet and opened the top drawer. It squeaked the same way it had for 40 years. Behind a stack of old quilted placemats and church programs was the thing I was looking for, a small, dented gray box, the kind you buy in a hardware store. I had kept it beneath my bed for decades before moving it here, away from easy reach, away from my memory. I brought it to the kitchen table and just looked at it. This box held what little I had left of her, of hope, of Lily, of the girl who was taken from me before I even learned how to say goodbye. Inside were scraps of the life I imagined with her, a faded hospital band with my maiden name. The only photo I had of myself at 14, pregnant, pale, and silent, taken secretly in a mirror. A pink ribbon I had taken from the hospital when they weren't looking. It didn't belong to anyone in particular, but I imagined it had touched her. That was enough. And then, there were the letters. I had written to her every April, every birthday. I never mailed them. I didn't know where to send them. But I wrote them anyway, on loose notebook paper, sometimes in pen, sometimes in pencil, always in the same tight cursive. They started the same. Dear Hope. I told her about the weather, about the dreams I had, about the name I had imagined for her if I had been allowed to choose. I told her I loved her, that she wasn't a mistake, that I had never stopped carrying her. Now, 40 letters later, they sat in a neat bundle tied with twine, worn thin by time and tears. I stared at them for a long while. Then I walked down the hall and tapped gently on Lily's door. She opened it slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "I want to show you something," I said. We sat at the kitchen table together. I placed the box between us. "I've kept this since the day you were born." She looked at me, eyes wide, then slowly opened the lid. Her hands moved, carefully, reverently. She held the ribbon up first, then the hospital band, then the photo. She didn't speak. Then she saw the letters. Her fingers traced the bundle, eyes filling as she read the top one. "You wrote to me?" she whispered. "Every year," I said. "I didn't know if you'd ever read them, but I couldn't not write." She untied the twine, gently opened one letter, then another. Tears ran silently down her cheeks. This is more than I ever hoped for," she said. And then she said, "Something that shattered and healed me all at once. I always thought no one wanted me, but I was wanted, even if no one told me. You did." I reached across the table and took her hand. "More than anything," I said. I just couldn't say it out loud until now. We sat in silence, surrounded by the weight of paper and memory. And in that stillness, I realized something. This box, this small gray container of loss and longing, it wasn't about grief anymore. It was about love. Love that never had a name. Until now. We spent the afternoon sitting on the back porch, the letters between us like stepping stones across a river. Lily had read through nearly half, pausing only to wipe her eyes or whisper, "I didn't know." She hadn't asked about the pregnancy yet, not the full story, but I could see it hovering behind her eyes, the questions she was afraid to speak. She finally broke the silence with a whisper. "Faye, who was my father? I knew it would come eventually. I had prepared for it, practiced answers in my head, but nothing made it easier when the moment arrived. I looked down at my hands, those same old hands that once clutched a pink hospital blanket, that once tried to cover bruises, that once held a secret for too long. "My brother," I said softly. Lily's face changed, not in horror, but in slow comprehension. Her eyes glistened, and she set the letter in her lap. "I thought it might be something like that," she said. "From the way you write, from what you didn't say." I nodded, my voice gone. "I didn't want to taint this," I finally managed. "Our moment, but I also promised I wouldn't lie to you." "I'm glad you didn't," she said, "even if it hurts." We sat in silence for a long while. Then she asked, "Did anyone know?" "My parents," I said. "They knew. My father beat me when he found out. My mother made the arrangements to have you taken. No one ever said his name again." Lily looked out over the yard, her arms folded. "I'm sorry," I said, "for the way you came into this world, for the story you inherited." She turned back to me. "No, don't be sorry. I'm here, aren't I? I made it. I have a life, a daughter. I've got light in my world." And then she added, "But I'm so damn angry for you." That made me cry. Not just because of the truth of it, but because no one had ever said that to me before. Not Mama, not Daddy, not the pastors, not the neighbors. For decades, my pain had existed in silence, wrapped in shame. And now here was Lily, born of that pain, offering me something like justice. We talked long after the sun went down, about trauma, about silence, about how sometimes survival means forgetting your own voice just to stay standing. I asked if she wanted to know more about him. "Henry." She shook her head. "He's not part of my story," she said. "You are." And with that, something lifted from my chest that I didn't know I'd been carrying. Before she left that night, she hugged me longer than before. "You gave me more than life, Faye," she whispered. "You gave me a truth I didn't know I needed." I held her close and whispered back, "And you gave me a reason to stop being afraid of mine." The first time I saw her, really saw her, it felt like looking through a mirror and into a dream all at once. Her name was Maya. Lily had shown me pictures, of course, but no photograph could prepare me for the moment that girl stepped into my living room and smiled like she'd known me her whole life. She was 16, tall, confident, and when she hugged me, it wasn't hesitant. It was tight, familiar, like roots finding soil. "You're shorter than I imagined," she teased, eyes gleaming with warmth. "And you're braver than I ever was," I replied, holding her at arm's length to really look. It was her eyes that stopped me. Almond-shaped, deep brown, the same shape as mine, the same shade as Lily's, but with something else in them too. Strength, curiosity, and openness that scared and thrilled me all at once. We sat in the kitchen while I made sweet tea. Maya leaned on the counter, asking about everything from the old stove to the photos on the fridge. She was hungry for story, not just names and dates, but truth. "I know what happened," she said gently when Lily stepped out to take a phone call. "I'm sorry you had to," I whispered. Maya shook her head. "I'm not," she said. "It makes me angry, but it also makes me proud." I stared at her, unsure how to respond. "You survived," she said. "That's part of my story too, isn't it?" Tears welled in my eyes. I had never imagined that a child born of pain could grow into someone who carried strength so gracefully. We went through the photo albums that afternoon. She asked questions about my childhood, about Mama's biscuits, about the sycamore tree in our yard that Henry used to climb. I told her about the blue notebook, the one where I wrote all my letters to Lily. I showed her the ribbon, the hospital band. She touched them with reverence, like sacred artifacts. And then quietly, she said, "You gave us a beginning, Faye, even if it started hard." Lily joined us later that evening. The three of us sat around the table eating stew, laughing about Maya's stories from school, talking about books, recipes, life. For the first time in decades, the house felt full, not loud, not chaotic, just whole. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the living room, clutching a photograph Maya had left on the table, a picture of her as a child, front, tooth missing, wearing a pink dress with little lambs embroidered along the hem. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I whispered to the quiet air, "You came back to me." And I meant every word. My mother died believing the silence was a victory. She believed we buried the shame the day I walked out of that hospital without a child. She believed secrets were like weeds, cut them down deep enough, and no one would ever know they were there. But they always grow back. I never told her. About the letters I wrote. Never told her I remembered Hope's birthday every single year. Never told her that the sound of babies crying in supermarkets made my chest seize. When she was dying, I visited once. Cancer had taken most of her voice by then. Her hands were thin, cold. Still, she managed to say the one thing she'd clung to her whole life. "Let the past die, Faye." I nodded, but I didn't mean it. Because the past doesn't die just because you stop speaking it. It lives in your bones. It whispers in your sleep. It hides in the cracks of family photos and in the empty space where names should be. After Lily and Maya visited, I found myself thinking about Mama more than usual. I pulled out the Bible she gave me on her deathbed, the one I'd never opened. It was worn at the edges, leather faded from years of prayer. I turned the pages slowly, expecting dust, maybe judgment. Instead, I found something else. Tucked between the pages of Psalms was a note, folded, yellowed, written in her familiar sharp cursive. "Faye, I did what I thought I had to. I don't expect you to understand. But I hope you find peace one day. I hope you forgive me. I hope you don't stay silent forever." I read it twice, then again, and I cried. Not just for the words, but for how late they came. For the truth that maybe she had seen me. Maybe she had felt the weight of what she forced me to carry. But her pride was louder than her guilt. Still, it was something. It didn't make what? She did right. It didn't erase the bruises or the silence, but it cracked open a door I'd sealed shut long ago. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen, the same way I always did for Hope, now Lily. But this time, I lit one for Mama too, not in honor of her choices, but for the girl she once was, the one who got married young, buried 5 babies, kept the church fed, and never once said, "I'm scared." Maybe she didn't know how. Maybe none of us did. Until now. It was early. Fall when Lily came back to visit, just the 2 of us this time. The leaves in St. Louis had started to turn, curling at the edges like old paper. The air carried that crisp promise of change, the kind that settles into your bones and whispers that something's ending, and something else is beginning. She brought a small suitcase, a new photo of Maya, and a casserole we ended up burning in the oven because we talked too long on the porch. We didn't need to fill the silence between us anymore. It had softened, grown into something we both understood. After dinner, she asked to see the box again, the one with the letters. I handed it to her with a smile. "You sure you're not tired of my teenage handwriting?" "Never," she said. She picked one at random, year 19, and read it quietly to herself, then another, then one more, and then she looked up, her eyes full. "I used to think no one wanted me," she said, "but reading these, it's like being chosen 100 times." "You were always chosen," I said. She reached for my hand. "I don't want to just be a part of your past," she said softly. "I want to be part of your now." I swallowed hard. "You already are." She took a deep breath. "Would it be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "If I called you Mom? Just once?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't want her to, but because something inside me, something I hadn't dared believe, cracked open. "Yes," I whispered. She smiled, and then, with a voice just above a whisper, she said, "Thank you, Mom." Tears streamed down my cheeks. She leaned in and hugged me tight, and I held her like I never got to when she was wrapped in that pink hospital blanket 64 years ago. It didn't matter that we lost decades. In that moment, I was her mother, and she was my child. We stayed up late that night. She asked about my favorite books. I told her about the time I snuck out as a teen and watched fireworks from the riverbank. She told me about the time Maya painted the neighbor's cat pink with Kool-Aid. We laughed until our sides hurt. Later, before bed, she left something on the kitchen table. A framed photo of the 3 of us, me, her, and Maya. Scrawled at the bottom, in Lily's handwriting, 3 generations, 1 voice. I stared at it long after she went to sleep. And for the first time in my life, I felt not just forgiven, but whole. I hadn't set foot inside New Hope Baptist Church in over 40 years. The last time I stood in that building, I was 14 and 5 months pregnant, forced into the 3rd pew every Sunday with my stomach hidden beneath oversized coats. I remember the pastor's wife wouldn't look me in the eye. The youth group leader said I was troubled. No one asked why, but Lily wanted to go. "I know it's part of your past," she said. "I just want to see where you came from." I told her I didn't think I could. Too many ghosts in that building. Too much silence. But Sunday morning came, and I found myself in front of my closet, smoothing the wrinkles from my nicest blouse. At 79, it still felt like I was that girl in the pew, trying not to be seen. But this time, I wasn't alone. We walked in together, heads turned. Some people squinted, trying to place me. 1 or 2 old-timers whispered my name. We sat in the very last pew. I figured it was safe there. The choir sang. The organ groaned just like I remembered. And then the pastor, a woman now, younger than Lily, stepped to the pulpit. "We're opening up the floor today," she said. "Anyone with a testimony, feel free to share. We believe in healing, in truth." My hands started shaking. Lily looked at me, gently touched my arm. "You don't have to," she whispered. But something inside me said, "Yes, I do." I stood. The room got quiet. "My name is Faye Williams," I said, voice cracking. "And I was once a child in this church, a child who was hurt in her own home, who was silenced by her own family, who was made to give up her baby, and how never speak of it again." gasps, a few murmurs. "But I'm speaking today," I continued, stronger now. "Because that baby, my baby, came back to me. Her name is Lily. She's here, and she is not a secret." I turned toward Lily. She was crying. The pastor stepped down, walked to us, and hugged me without saying a word. The congregation stood, applauded, some cried. For the first time in my life, I spoke her name in that church, and instead of shame, I felt grace. Not the kind handed down by men in robes, but the kind you fight for, the kind you earn through fire and silence and truth. After the service, a woman who had once braided my hair in Sunday school came up to me. "I'm sorry, Faye," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't know. I should have seen." I nodded. "It's okay. I see it now." And that was enough. That day, we didn't just reclaim space, we reclaimed voice. It's strange, isn't it? How life can come full circle when you least expect it. Lily now calls me every Sunday morning. Sometimes we talk about recipes, sometimes about the weather in Michigan, but mostly we talk about life, the one we have now, the one we built not from what we were given, but from what we refused to let die. A few months ago, she brought Maya to visit again. We planted tulips together in the backyard. Maya knelt in the dirt beside me, her hands deep in soil, and said, "I'm going to tell my kids about you one day." "Only the good parts, I hope," I said, laughing. "All of it," she replied, "because all of it matters." That night, after they left, I sat alone on the porch and watched the stars. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who whispered her pain into pillows, who flinched at footsteps, who learned to carry silence like armor. And I thought about Lily, how, despite everything, she found her way back. She once told me she spent years believing something about her was broken, that she wasn't worth finding, that maybe her birth mother hadn't loved her. And I told her the truth. That love was never the issue. Fear was. Fear of my father, fear of my mother, fear of what people would say if they knew the truth, but mostly fear of looking her in the eyes and not being enough. But Lily never made me feel like I wasn't enough. She made me feel like I was still becoming. Last week, she sent me a necklace. Silver, simple, a small charm in the shape of a lamb. "Because of the blanket," she wrote in the card. "Because even back then, you found a way to love me." I wear it every day now. Some days I still light a candle on April 17th, not out of grief anymore, but gratitude. Because she was never truly gone. She was always mine. Not in the way the world defines, not by law or by bloodlines or hospital records, but in spirit, in voice, in every letter I ever wrote, in every whispered, "I'm sorry," I tucked into dreams. She was always mine, because love doesn't vanish just because it was silenced. And now that silence is broken. There are things I never thought I'd say out loud. I never thought I'd tell anyone about the nights Henry came into my room. I never thought I'd speak Lily's name in church. And I certainly never thought I'd sit here, 79 years old, telling my story to the world, not with shame, but with honor. Because this is not just my truth. It's the truth of every woman who was told to be quiet. Every girl who was told her pain would ruin the family. Every mother who was forced to grieve in secret. When Lily came back into my life, she didn't just reconnect me to her. She reconnected me to myself, to the girl I used to be before the silence, to the woman I became despite it. One evening not long ago, she brought Maya again. We sat on the porch watching fireflies. Maya leaned over and said, "Did you ever think your voice would matter to this many people?" I smiled. I didn't even think I had one. But I do. And so do you. That's why I'm telling this now. Not for sympathy, but for someone out there. Maybe a young girl sitting in her room thinking no one will believe her. Maybe a woman in her 60s still holding on to a story she's never told. Maybe a granddaughter wondering why her grandmother flinches when someone raises their voice. I'm telling this so you know, you are not alone. Silence protects the abuser, but truth frees the survivor. So if you're listening and your story sounds like mine, or if someone once told you to forget, or cover it up, or smile through it, I want you to hear me clearly. You deserve to be heard. You deserve peace. You deserve the right to speak your name and the name of what you survived. For decades, I let them control my story, but not anymore. Now, every letter I wrote, every tear I held back, every prayer I whispered, it all led me here, to this voice, to this moment, to you. If Faye's story touched you or reminded you of someone you love, don't let it end here. Comment your city below. Let Faye know she's not alone. Click like if her voice moved you, and subscribe for more real stories from women who carried silence until they didn't. Because every story matters. Every truth deserves the light. And sometimes it takes 79 years for a voice to return. But when it does, the world finally listens.